Hello, it's Gareth. This is Somewhere on Earth, and it's Tuesday, the 27th of February, 2024. And with us today is studio expert Ghislaine Boddington. Greetings, Ghislaine. And here we are.
Hello, Gareth.
Again,
Hi.
doing Somewhere on Earth. And just to ease us into the rest of the podcast, then, what have you been looking at these last few days, weeks?
Well, I'm deep in a whole new research project, actually linked to my University of Greenwich work and Kingston University, and it's all about conversational AIs that talk to you through phones and speakers. And so at the moment, with my my producer and assistant, we're looking at these AIs that are supposed to learn with you and talk to you and be natural and responsive. They've got emotional tones of voice, much more advanced than Alexa and Siri, apparently. But there is quite a worrying range of them out there. So we're testing out some. They're meant to help you with your mental health and other problems in life. So we're exploring those because they're not highly personalised. And, of course, that means they could very easily be giving wrong advice because it's generative AI stuff, you know. So
those hallucinations could be a problem.
Exactly. So sadly, the most popular AI companion is the AI girlfriend. Millions and millions of men now have AI girlfriends, and they can choose to have them text them numerous times a day, giving them praise and love all day long.
There you go. That's
Makes
what men
it a bit
like.
tough for the rest of us.
Okay, lovely. That says so much, believe you me. Ghislaine, fascinating. And let's keep an eye on that research here on the podcast as you get further and further into it. All right, let's carry on. Let's get into the podcast. And coming up today, we have a special one for you. In our midst, it's only the Wiki Guy, as even he describes himself. Yes, Wikipedia co-founder Jimmy Wales joins us. He's also founder and these days a trustee of the Wikimedia Foundation. And he has a newish project called Trust Café. And Jimmy never does things by halves, as we all know. In fact, he does them by fours, as he once told the New York Times. He said, "I tend to eat things in fours. I'll eat 4 nuts, 4 grapes, 4 chips at a time. I don't know why. It's not really a superstition. I don't think anything bad will happen if I don't, but 3 potato chips just doesn't seem right." Well, Jimmy's rule of fours will be alive and well in this edition. We've picked out 4 listener questions for the Wiki Guy. Questions like discussions of Wikipedia's moderation policies, the impact of large language models, and maybe a few questions of my own. Let's see. This is the Somewhere on Earth podcast. All right, well, let's jump in then, Jimmy. And in fact, I did say that I'd maybe think of a few questions of my own. I have to earn my keep somehow. Shall we start with Trust Café? I mentioned it in the introduction. So what is Trust Café?
Yeah, so Trust Café is a pilot project at trustcafe.io. And the idea is to take everything I've learned from the world of Wikipedia and of fandom and think about how to reimagine what a social network could be like with a model where the community is actually in control. So the idea is the most trusted members of the community have the ability to rate things up and down, but it isn't based on sheer numbers. It's based on being trusted in the community. And the idea is that the algorithms will promote content from trusted members rather than just whoever gets the most eyeballs and most attention. The idea is to say, look, in most social networks, there's a real incentive to make inflammatory comments, to get into big, huge debates, because that's what gets you attention. Let's change the algorithm so that there's an incentive to post thoughtful, intriguing replies and comments. So it's still, it's a little pilot project. We've got 2 developers, and we're constantly tweaking the software and improving and learning and thinking and talking to our community. But hopefully in a few years' time, it'll turn into something really interesting. In the meantime, I'm enjoying it, so that's all that really matters.
That's important. How do people gain trust then?
Well, it's pretty old-fashioned, really. In our community, it starts in a top-down way, sort of algorithmically. I see people in the community who I think are smart and kind and boost their trust rating, and they can boost other people's trust rating. And the way you get trust from other people is it's very human. It's post things that are sensible. Don't pick fights for no reason. Don't quote low quality sources, things like that. Everybody understands this concept. It's just that social media has traditionally ignored the whole concept, and they optimize for engagement and time on site and number of ad views and so forth. So it's a different approach that I hope leads to a different result.
And Ghislaine, you've been dipping in, haven't you?
I have, yes. Literally just this last week. So, but very interested. And I was very interested to see, and it was just engaged in how I conceive as various elements of it that you've chosen from different places, different things, put into one platform. And that one platform, it's nice to have those all together in one place, yeah. So I will be playing into it. But what I'm very interested in is actually looking at this kind of emergence of networks, which, obviously has been in the pipeline virtually for many years now, since the early 90s, late 80s. And I was wondering what you can see out there in terms of those emergent dynamic networks and ecosystems that you've been involved in so long, knowledge sharing communities, which have participation, which have collaborative participation in them. So is the Trust Café really like a culmination of your experience on that to try and get us to this next level?
One of the things I've always believed is what I call community design, which is a combination of sort of rules in the community, but also the software that supports those rules. So one of the reasons that Wikipedia works as well as it does is the actual design of the software, the ability if somebody comes in and does something harmful, anyone can go in and revert it. And then the community elects administrators. So now we're back to rules and so forth, and they can block people and so on. And so it's a whole complicated system that has evolved over time to sort of achieve a certain objective. And, my belief with Trust Café is that we can take that kind of idea of say, let's design the software and the rules, and at every moment think about quality. Think about how are we going to promote quality discourse, how are we going to promote interesting people. And, you can't completely ignore some of the traditional metrics. So if you say, oh, well, we don't care anything about engagement, well, people have to like the site, right? So if people come back and use the site again and again, that tells you something positive or something negative sometimes if it's just like super addictive like TikTok maybe. But you want to also think about that and say, oh, I created the perfect social network. No one ever gets in a fight because no one ever uses it. And there's no toxic content because nobody's posting anything. So you've got to think about popularity. But really, how do you get there and also take into account community control and thoughtfulness and kindness and building out a space that people are like, you know what, this is a home. I like to be here. I felt bad about myself when I was on Instagram. I feel good about myself when I've been here for a year. I've met interesting people and I've learned new things, and that's good.
So the branches that you can go into, and it says my branches, and I haven't done this yet fully, but in my understanding of network culture and the emergent dynamics of networks, etc., will they be kind of like, are they like kind of hubs or clusters where a certain, holding the network together, and will they have kind of interaction between them too in the longer term maybe?
In the longer term, maybe. I mean, the closest analogy you might think of is a subreddit. It's a topic-based thing. So, for example, there's the Formula One branch, and there's one lovely guy, one of our early adopters, who posts every day about Formula One. I actually have become learned my fandom of Formula One from he's caught me up on everything. And so, the idea is, you can subscribe to or follow whatever branch you're interested in, and you go there and have a conversation. But obviously, there's a lot of interesting things to be done with topics that live near each other in some sense, and cross-posting and things like that.
So there's a real opportunity for people to be early adopters in this. You mentioned the guy who's really early adopter of the site, really interested in it, wants to get some Formula One stuff up. So it's almost analogous to the first 100 people to write a Wikipedia page. It's early days, so people can still shape how the whole thing's going to work out.
Definitely. And there's, so far we've got a small community. We... Like right now, the way the software is set up, we don't even get indexed by Google other than the homepage. And that's because we're deliberately trying not to grow too fast. So I talk about it rarely. on a podcast here and there, and then I get some interesting podcast type of people coming in, and that's good. I have never tweeted about it. I'm just saying we need to grow the community thoughtfully and organically to try to get the base of something that could be really interesting.
Yeah, and is there a sort of technical side to that as well? Just because obviously it's expensive to scale a new business or website or app or what have you. Is that partly it? Because obviously you're not in a kind of ad-based revenue maximization model where you can just buy a chunk of servers at AWS and so on. So is that a kind of part of it as well then?
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting things going on. So first off, we don't have ads. We have a voluntary payment model, so you can sign up to be a patron and you get a little badge saying you're a patron and all that. We're not even close to profitable. I pay for it for the most part, but we got lovely people who are supporting us. But what's interesting going on in the tech world these days is something called serverless, and the idea is to have functions as a service and services on AWS and Google and so on, where it scales down to zero if no one's using it, and it scales as high as you want to go almost instantly, which gets a small group of people out of managing servers. And I mean, I remember the early days of Wikipedia. I would literally order a stack of servers and drive down to the data center and screw them into the racks myself. We had to physically buy servers. Now we just get whatever capacity we need in the cloud as we need it, which means that the tech part of scaling should scale with the traffic in a linear fashion, and then the revenue should scale, hopefully, in a linear fashion if people sign up and pay, hopefully, if they think it's nice.
Money would be nice.
But for now, it's the main cost is the development cost.
Sure. All right. Jimmy, thank you. Should we have some listener questions?
Yes, yeah.
Like this one from Gowrie of Hiram, and she's going to mention you've got some other venture. It's encyclopaedia wiki something or other. Anyway, Gowrie has a question about that, and asks, why is truthful information sometimes removed from Wikipedia? I say this from personal experience, continues Gowrie. In January 2022, my husband, myself, and my son visited Savali, an agricultural site in Maharashtra, travelling from Hyderabad. As calculated by the filmmaker Chris Riley, this location is the equivalent place on Earth to the landing site of the Perseverance rover on Mars. Dr. Riley proceeded to add a paragraph about our visit to the Wikipedia page on the Perseverance rover. But that paragraph was removed within a short time from that page, and presumably because there was no coverage about it on our local media, and therefore it couldn't be verified. And then Gowrie goes on to say, our visit was covered by the BBC podcast Digital Planet, and also through an article written by Dr. Chris Riley on Medium, along with some photos of our visit in February 2022. The removal of the details of our visit from the wiki page isn't of much importance or consequence, but what about other important information that may be wrongfully removed? How will that be prevented? Asks Gowrie.
So this is fascinating, and I'm going to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but that's only because I was sent the question early. So I did a bit of homework because I thought this is an interesting case. So the first thing I would say is that when we think about an entry like the Perseverance rover, that is a encyclopedia article about the rover, about the scientific mission, about the space program, and all of that sort of thing. And probably this visit to a parallel point on Earth by, some people doesn't really belong in that entry. It's not what people are expecting or hoping to find when they go to that entry. But I did ask myself, okay, well, for this place, I understand it's a small village, and I don't think, at least I couldn't find, an entry in Wikipedia about the small village at all. That means possibly this is the most notable thing that's ever happened to the village, is the fact that it somehow corresponds as the sister point, you might call it. And that means in that small area, in that small village, that actually might be relevant, might be important. If someone is saying, gee, I'm traveling, I'm going through India, and I'm going through a series of places, and I'm in rural India, and I say, oh, what is this village? And I look it up, and I might say, oh, that's actually interesting. This is the parallel point, and there's some pictures of this visit these people did. So sometimes it is really about where does it go in Wikipedia. Now, I'm not sure it goes in Wikipedia at all. I'm not really sure on that level, but that's often the case. And usually, we have a lot of discussions and debates in the community. It's a constant dialogue, a constant discourse about what should be in Wikipedia, what shouldn't. And the most important thing that comes out of that is merely being truthful is not enough. Lots of things are true, but don't really belong in an encyclopedia. So the way we normally think about this is, could we have an entry? Here I just see a water bottle on the table. The listeners can't see it, but it's a Thermos brand water bottle. Could we have an entry about this particular water bottle on this table? Well, no, there's nothing interesting to say about it. Could we have an entry about the Thermos company? Well, of course, it's a big company. Could we have an entry about this particular model of water bottle? Well, maybe. Sometimes, a particular brand of shoe or a particular type could be interesting enough. But you definitely can't have an entry about everything that's true. And so then that gets us into a whole fascinating world, and there's hundreds and hundreds of pages in Wikipedia asking the question, what is notability in the sense of Wikipedia? One of the things which was identified by the question is independent, high-quality, third-party coverage, media coverage of some sort. And so they had that in this case, but that's not always enough. We also have to ask ourselves, is this relevant to the reader? So someone's showing up and they say, oh, I want to read about the Perseverance rover. They will be interested in where it landed on Mars. They're not so interested in the parallel point on Earth. But a small village, yeah, they might find that interesting.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Ghislaine?
Yes, no, I think it does. It does make a lot of sense. But I'm just to hit back to the question about what may be wrongfully removed. At this moment in time, we know there's a huge rising number of people who really want to change information to suit their own views. Yeah, whether it's a bias politically or culturally or whatever, gender or whatever. So I guess that must be complex for Wikimedia, maintaining a debate rather than getting pulled into kind of battleground of opinions.
Yeah, of course. This has always been the case, though. This is nothing new about the last few years. It seems that way sometimes, but it's nothing new for Wikipedia, and it's nothing new for the world. But of course, often people will come to Wikipedia, particularly when they're coming, they've never edited before, and they assume that Wikipedia is a battleground. And sometimes you'll see it described this way in a way that we inside Wikipedia, as the editors and the people working on it, really find annoying. If you come to Wikipedia with the idea that you're supposed to come and right great wrongs and fight for a particular perspective, and that somehow as the outcome of all the clashes, the truth will emerge, well, that turns out just to be not true. Like, if people come in and they just want to yell at each other, I mean, go back to Twitter. You're very welcome there. What does work is people coming in who maybe have a different perspective, maybe they have a different background, different sets of knowledge, who approach each other with kindness, assuming good faith, and saying, okay, let's work on this. So my classic example is a controversial topic like abortion, and you can imagine a kind and thoughtful Catholic priest and a kind and thoughtful family planning advocate, and they come together to work on the entry, and they can both understand Wikipedia is not going to say abortion is a sin, but it will say, according to the Catholic Church, this is the position on abortion, and the Pope has said this, and critics have responded that. And if you have people who are kind and thoughtful, they can actually work through it and get to a presentation that they're both proud of, to say, look, if you don't know what the controversy is and you really want to learn all sides presented fairly, this is a great thing. You should read this. And it turns out even people who are quite ideological, if they are intellectually confident, they're actually comfortable with that. If you knew as much about the issue as I do, you would probably agree with me. Whereas people who are less confident in their ideas tend to be the ones who go crazy yelling at people because they're actually afraid that they'll be shown to be wrong, and so they want to yell to shut the other side up. So that is my sort of view of human nature and the view of the way these things work, and in practice it works out pretty well. So you do have to be careful. People do come in with organized agendas of various kinds, and then we also, we have a policy of following reliable sources. And so what does that mean? Well, it does mean if all consensus of all humankind is in one direction, we're probably not going to give the other direction very much space. And as we know, as a human species, we've gotten things wrong before. And someday we'll look back, and I'm sure if in an earlier era they had a very kind and thoughtful group of people writing an encyclopedia, they might portray, using leeches in medicine as a grand idea, when now we think probably not so much. Although I read recently that it wasn't as
becoming a thing again.
Yeah, well, it wasn't as crazy as we may have thought for a while. But we accept that as we learn and as things change, we will discover things about our common understanding of the world that were mistaken. That's fine. I'm completely comfortable with that. The alternative for us would be to equally host every kind of crackpot crank theory, and that doesn't really make sense. So I always say, for example, our article on the moon doesn't say, some say rocks, some say cheese. Who knows? That's not
exactly.
Neutrality, really.
Yeah, sure.
But if there's a legitimate historical conflict, I once met with a member of parliament in Lithuania who was comparing a particular entry in Wikipedia, and he was comparing the English version and the Polish version and the Lithuanian version. And it was about a battle between Lithuania and Poland. And he said, well, the Lithuanian Wikipedia says basically the Lithuanian perspective, and the Polish Wikipedia says the Polish perspective. The English Wikipedia, he's like, it's really good. It addresses what is a real historical conflict. There, in amongst historians, there's actually some complications around interpreting the evidence. And so he's like, you would really understand what that conflict is about if you read the English version. And his question was, how do we get the Polish and the Lithuanian versions to be? And I said, give us some time, and also you can speak those languages, go and edit.
Yeah, do it. Okay, all right. That's a good example.
Yeah.
And there is, by the way, a Wikipedia article on medicinal leeches. So just
Great,
check that.
fantastic.
So there we are. Right, Jimmy, we have a question via voice memo for you now.
Oh, great.
Hi, this is Stefano Ghazali with a two-part question for Jimmy Wales. So my first part of the question is, how do you think generative AI and large language models will affect knowledge repositories like Wikipedia and Stack Overflow? And the second part of the question is, how do you think the open knowledge community will react to this, with the fact that large language models have a likelihood to hallucinate? So how can we validate the information that we're being given? Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thanks for your question. Brilliant question, Stefano. Appreciate it. So, Jimmy, there you go. LLMs and hallucinations. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, Stefano, that is a great question, and it is really the question of this year, I think, as these models have become accessible to the public for the first time, and they're really amazing, and they're really deeply flawed at the same time. So when I think about Wikipedia and I think about Stack Overflow, they're very, very different use cases. And in fact, I think for Stack Overflow, I think there is a problem. So I'm sort of the perfect typical user of Stack Overflow. I don't write on Stack Overflow because although I'm a programmer, I'm a pretty bad programmer. But I like programming as a hobby. And whenever I'm going to do some programming, I get an error message. I Google the error message and I go to Stack Overflow and I read what somebody else had the error, and then people explain to them how to fix it and so on. Great, fantastic. Now I just go to ChatGPT and I paste in the error message and I say, can you explain this to me? And I get a very good explanation. And it tends to be quite good and not hallucinatory. It seems to be much better at tech questions than some other areas. It isn't always perfect, but even when it's not perfect, it will give me sort of, well, here's 6 things you should try. And I can go through them, or, here's how this actually, okay, it's pretty good. I find it very useful. Wikipedia is a different use case, but I do think there is a sense that for readers, in some cases, it's sort of the equivalent, except for the hallucination problem, which is severe. I always enjoy telling the story. One of the things I love to ask ChatGPT is, who is Kate Garvey, my wife? So Kate is not a famous person, but she's been in the news a bit, and she worked for Tony Blair for 10 years, and she's mentioned in several books, and she's doing work with the UN and so forth. But she's at that perfect kind of margin where ChatGPT sort of knows who she is, but sort of doesn't, and very confidently makes things up. So it once told me that she'd set up a nonprofit organization to fight for women's empowerment in the workplace. And she set it up with Miriam Gonzalez, who is Nick Clegg's wife, which is kind of plausible because we know Nick and Miriam, and Nick works in my industry now and at Facebook. And I showed it to my wife, and she said, I mean, that could have happened had we been at the right dinner party. Like, it's not... She in fact runs...
And that's just the scary thing about hallucinations, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
let's bring this back to Wikipedia, what that means for you. Because I suppose behind that, and I guess where you're going with this, is, well, you could read a Wikipedia article that seems very convincing.
I mean, for sure. Yeah, exactly. So it can be very convincing. It's very plausible. And that's actually the scariest thing about the misinformation that comes out of ChatGPT is that it is so plausible. And so that's a problem. So for us, if we want to think about how we're thinking about it, how we think about large language models in the world of Wikipedia. So first, there's no sense that large language models can just replace the work of the Wikipedia community. In fact, it's not even particularly helpful because the areas it's strong at are already like huge Wikipedia entries. Like if you say, who is Barack Obama, it's going to give you a perfectly decent answer. It's more the things we're working on, the small village in India and things like that, where you don't really want it to make things up and you really want to verify and so forth. But I do think there's some interesting possibilities. So one of the ideas I've been toying with is consider a short Wikipedia entry with only 4 or 5 references at the bottom. Could you feed in that entry and feed in the text of the 5 sources and say, is there anything in the Wikipedia entry that is not supported by the sources? Or is there anything in the sources that probably should be in the Wikipedia entry? And if it can do that with a reasonable degree of accuracy, to suggest an edit to a human, to say, oh, well, this article says the person was born on this date, should you add that? And then you go, yeah, okay, that's a good idea. And would that be a fun thing for people to do? Because always with Wikipedia, it has to be fun to do. People aren't slaving away, not having fun. They're writing things they think are interesting. But if they find it useful and helpful, why not? That sounds kind of cool. Also, imagine scanning over all of Wikipedia and saying, find me entries that are both popular, so you would have to have a matrix of popularity, and seem biased. Okay. Because a lot of people who are working on Wikipedia are very interested in fighting against biased entries. But how do you find them? You know, we don't really have an easy method of measuring it. But if ChatGPT can say, oh, this contains a lot of biased language, then as a human you can look at it and you might agree or you might not. Maybe it's just misinterpreting, you know. And so those are the kinds of things I think are worth exploring. And then also we're thinking about, you know, our search at Wikipedia. If you go to Wikipedia and you type Queen Victoria in the search box, it's going to be fine. You're going to find the article about Queen Victoria. If you ask a question, no, it's just going to find the keywords that you happen to enter. But what if you said, why do ducks fly south for winter? Well, you know that's in Wikipedia somewhere, but where is it? Is it in the article on ducks? Is it the article on bird migration? Is it somewhere else? Is it all of those? If it can read all of Wikipedia and not make things up, that's really important, and say, well, according to this entry and that entry, here's a basic reason with links to go and read more. That gives people a new way of interacting with this knowledge base that might be quite fun and might be quite interesting. So we've got our machine learning team who are, busy, looking into these things, thinking about what do they mean, how can we do it, what does it all mean? And, you know, one of the things is the large language models actually have a very weak ability to actually tell you where they learned something, because they're basically giant probability estimates of what the next word might be given a bunch of prior words. And so they've chopped all the data up into atomistic words, and then it's amazing that it works at all. And yet it does. And so sometimes, if you ask it how it made that, how does it know that, it will give you a source that it made up out of thin air.
Yeah. All right. Okay. All right, Jimmy, thank you. Right, now this one is from DK Mock, who says, Dear Somewhere on Earth team, I'm excited to hear that Wikipedia's Jimmy Wales will be a guest on the podcast. I'd love to submit a question for consideration. Here goes. I understand Wikipedia relies on financial donations from ordinary users, and I'm concerned about the viability of this going into the future. Those who depend on Wikipedia are most often the least able to pay, and the cost of living crisis, compounded by climate disasters, means many who'd like to donate no longer have the means. Here in Australia, continues DK, here in Australia, many non-profits are struggling to stay afloat. How can organisations that provide essential services like Wikipedia, Signal and Blue Sky find reliable, robust and ethical funding in an economically unstable future? Really enjoying the podcast. Keep up the good work. Jimmy.
Yeah, very good. Well, so our funding model is, we're a charity, a nonprofit organization. The vast majority of the money that funds Wikipedia comes from the small donors, which I think is very important. Sometimes people see the banner and they say, oh, why don't you just make Apple and Google and Microsoft and Facebook pay for it? And I said, let's think that through. I think our intellectual independence is quite important, and the idea that we depend for our resources on the general public helps us to stay on the straight and narrow in terms of thinking about don't be biased, don't go in one direction, don't, whatever. And so it's really important that that model has worked for us and is still working. So we run the organization in a very conservative way. I don't mean right wing. I mean careful. Yeah. We try to bring in more money than we spend every year and build up our reserves. We have a separate endowment fund, which is partly funded from our general budget, but also that's where we direct a lot of major donors into the endowment fund because it's one step removed from the content. And that it all works. I mean, right now we always have to take fundraising seriously, but we're okay. And I think the broader questions that you ask are constantly on our minds about, how do we keep Wikipedia safe in the event of a major economic crisis, worldwide depression or something like this? Can we make sure that we can weather a period of time? And the answer is, I believe, yes, we can. We've built up reserves and we're okay. Now, the bigger question about nonprofits struggling, that I don't have a simple answer to that. I wish I did. But we're lucky as compared to a lot of knowledge projects because we are so popular. So only a small percentage of people actually donate, but that's enough. So some of the other things that you mentioned, although I think Blue Sky is actually a for-profit, but the other things like Signal and so forth, they also ask for donations. They are funded in some cases by their founders who have a lot of money and things like that. But I think it's really important that, when you get that little message from Signal or whoever to say, could you support us? Yeah, chip in a few quid. And I think it's really important.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I noticed, I think this is up to date, that you're the 7th most visited website in the world and the only not-for-profit in the top 10, if not more.
I think more,
that
top
tells
50.
you
I'm guessing. There's nothing
That
quite like
which
lot,
I guess
doesn't
is DK's concern, and maybe that of many
Yeah.
others. What a lovely funding model that makes us all feel very good about ourselves, but really is sustainable. And I think there, obviously, you put your case that it is.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing it now for over 20 years, and. Oh, is it?
Post.com bubble?
Yes, it's over 20.
Yeah, it's 2001.
2001.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Wow.
been nearly
So it's,
25 years, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of bedding in all right, I think. All right, final question then from, this is either Jan or Jan Sale. I'm going to assume Jan, but it could be Jan. Here we go. I'm a long-time supporter of Wikipedia and have donated monthly for a number of years now to support it. I love the idea of a public global knowledge base, but there's a problem. I tried to write up and post a page about one science fiction author, fairly well known and has won a couple of awards. And I wrote up a long article about one of his sci-fi book series that I really love and hope that this would help others to find really good series and the sci-fi universe that he built. Unfortunately, I ran into a problem here. As the author had started by self-publishing, there weren't many other reviews or talk about it except to the places where he publishes, like, for instance, Audible for the audio version and Amazon, etc. for the book. So the Wiki person who looked into this and should have approved it just rejected it as it couldn't be 100% verified. As you can understand, I'm paraphrasing here, by the way, but as you can understand, says Jan, I'm very disappointed. And the problem is there's no way for me to appeal these things to a higher authority, as far as I know. So if you get to a reviewer that doesn't like what you've tried to write, you're kind of in limbo. So this has putting me off writing stuff for Wikipedia. So, which is a shame. Let's all hope that Jan will continue writing for Wikipedia. And my interpretation of that question, Jimmy, is it may be if the Wikipedia reviewer, the Wikipedian, happens to be really into that sci-fi author, there's a pretty good chance that page would have stood. I'm going to put it to you.
It's a great question. And, it's a problem that is very hard for us to solve, in a sense, because, so we have something that's fantastic, and it's gained traction outside of normal channels. So the books have not been reviewed by the New York Times. They're maybe not New York Times bestsellers, but they're selling well. And so there hasn't been much media coverage, and so there's no third-party sources. It's self-published work and so on and so forth. So it's hard for us to write a biography in that case. We don't know anything about the author. To even write about the book series, what can we really add from because we're not journalists, and journalism is really, really important. So there are cases like this that are actually really, they stump me because I think it's unfortunate, but I don't think the right answer is to say, well, anybody can come and write anything they like, because then you really open the door to complete chaos and a loss of quality overall. I'll give a completely different example that I think structurally, philosophically is really the same problem. What about in cultures and places, it's like in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's oral history, but not so much written down? How do we grapple with that? Because if there's no written down history, there's no editors deciding, judging books, there's no history written in the traditional manner, then you just say, how do you know this? Well, my grandma told me. Okay, well, that's actually knowledge, right?
Well, exactly.
It's probably valid, but it's hard to verify.
And on that basis, Homer would never have made it to have a Wikipedia entry. I just heard Homer.
Yeah. But, there's loads of things that I could say about my mom that are all true, but they don't really belong in Wikipedia. And so I think that's an interesting question, is what are the boundaries of what an encyclopedia can cover versus maybe a different type of work, a different type of reference, that's a more open-ended sort of encyclopedia of self-published authors, where you might say, actually, in that context, we're gonna open it up, and the references you need are your Audible sales numbers and your Amazon
I was thinking
numbers
that revising
like
the verification criteria, maybe to take account of new publishing.
and
names.
this is within the community.
Possibly that would be definitely looking ahead at the next 10 years, because there are so many things that do not get an academic source or a journalistic source. So many things. I'm thinking about live performance. I work in from live performing background. Well, time-based work of all types, happens across an hour, 2 hours, and then it disappears, and it's gone. Yeah. Sometimes it's recorded, sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's a critic writes about it, but actually pretty rarely, because there's very little coverage for performance in the papers, etc.
And yet it's as culturally relevant as anything that may be more permanently
like the oral
written,
documentation,
or easier in inverted commas to verify. It's a huge issue, but I think we should wrap it up there. We can carry on chatting in the subscription edition of this podcast. But final request, though, from Jan, wants listener number 47, as a Star Trek fan, says Jan. So that is subscriber number 47. So I like the Star Trek reference. 42 adjusted for inflation. 47. So really quickly, can we convene a very quick SUDS committee here? And Jimmy, maybe you could, even though you probably don't know what on earth I'm on about, but do you think, well, as long as Ghislaine agrees, if you say that Ghislaine does, you just need to say it's okay for Jan to have 47, but you can veto it. Okay, but, it's not a trick question, by the way.
It's a Star Trek reference? I thought it was Douglas Adams.
Well, the 42 thing is, but the number 47 is a kind of recurring joke and across quite a lot of Star Trek. Oh. I think that even the writers got bored of it after a while.
In fact, one of the things I joke is like my role in Wikipedia, I'm not the CEO, I don't work there. My role in the community is completely powerless constitutional monarch. But that does give me the ability to make decrees from time to time.
Oh.
So by the authority vested in me by myself, I decree 47 is okay.
Wow, I should think that's
Great.
very much made
As official as you're ever going to get.
That is okay. That seems to be validation there. So we'll accept that. Thank you, Jimmy. And folks, you can get in touch. The usual places, of course. Our email is hello@somewhereonearth.co. On WhatsApp, we're code 44 7486 329 484. We have Keziah and Dylan behind the glass for you this week doing the audio here at Lansons Team Farner. Our production manager is Liz. The editor is Ania. We have had Ghislaine Boddington here to give us expertise and excellent company. And I'm some bloke called Gareth. That'll do. Thank you, Jimmy. And see you soon, folks. More in the subscription. Bye-bye.